Good morning, everyone. My name is Tim Walton. Minerals Research Institute of Western Australia, and thanks very much for all joining our METS Innovation Program Explainer. Just before we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land on which we meet, the Whadjuk Noongar people, and wherever you may be in Australia. I personally pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. We're going to take about an hour today to run through the METS Innovation Program that was launched in December, and applications are closing on the 5th of March. I would like to start by acknowledging our guest speaker today, Simon Bolster. Simon is in Vancouver, so we're very grateful that he's made the time to join. Just to quickly run through what the agenda is today, I'm going to have a quick briefing on MRIWA. Then I'll hand over to Simon to give you basically his experience and the portable PPB experience of working with MRIWA. Then we'll dive into the program itself, followed by a Q&A. We've a hard stop at 11. So please, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. All right. Now, if I might just talk about Minerals Research Institute of WA, or MRIWA. We've been existing for the past 40 years or so in different guises. Our remit is to progress mineral and mining research in Western Australia for the benefit of Western Australians. So the great thing about that is that we have enormous flexibility in what we can do in doing that. And as you'll see from my presentation later, we have a number of focus areas and research areas that we have been asked by the board and the West Australian government to deliver upon. So with that, I'll pass over to Simon. So Simon Bolster is the Managing Director of Portable PPB. He is has 30 years experience in gold exploration, and his company has been a partner with MRIWA for 5 years. So with that, joining us from Vancouver, I'll hand over to Simon.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tim. Yeah, I'm here in Vancouver just for a week for a conference, but we've been very grateful for the help that we've had from MRIWA. So we got our technology as a minimal viable product out of CSIRO, and the technology is a game changer. When I first heard about it, I was actually in a pub in Toronto when I first heard about it. And what it allows us to do is to be able to take portable XRF, something like this one here, and there's about 15,000 of these in the industry, only about 7,500 of these, of which about 7,500 of these are in the gold industry, but they've all suffered from a problem. They're in the gold industry mostly for doing base metals and for being able to record pathfinder elements, but also to be able to record lithogeochemistry, so the type of elements in rocks. But they've all suffered, sorry about that, they've all suffered from the problem that they can't actually do gold. And the issues are that if you're shooting like this, unless you're directly on top of the gold, you won't be able to identify the gold. The other one then is you've got problems around detection limits, and you also have problems around interfering metals. And when we first got the technology out of CSIRO, it had only had about 1,500 samples run on it. And we had a whole stack of known unknowns. And what we needed to do, we realized very quickly that there was a lot of fundamental research that needed to be done. We got help from companies, and they came on under a sponsorship scheme, which operated a bit like a frequent flyer program. But which was good, but we also needed some funding. And the good thing then about approaching MRIWA was it gave us the opportunity to get some extra funding to be able to allow us to do some fundamental research and to continue work that perhaps should have been done in CSIRO but wasn't, and then ultimately lead on to something that we could release to industry that had a lot of, we wanted to eliminate the known unknowns. We wanted to improve the product, and we wanted to complete a series of case studies which would validate and help us to fine-tune the process, but also ultimately lead to a better product to be released. And some of the things that we had to do, for instance, was initially, the way the process works, perhaps I should say, is it's about putting a sample in a container, you then add a chemical to it, and then you leach the gold out, and then that is what's read on the XRF. It's a patented process. But initially when we started, for instance, it was in bottles. These bottles then were put into a cement mixer, and quickly realized that bottles aren't very practical. So then we switched to a flat pack like this. From changing from a bottle to a flat pack, it means there's a whole change in the whole way in which the chemicals and the agitation and everything that's needed to leach the gold would change. So we had to do a lot of fundamental research on that. The mixer that was being used initially was a cement mixer. Cement mixer would be at an angle with tubes in it, into which initially bottles were being put. And when you change the angle, we needed to know whether or not that was going to make a difference. Ultimately, we went on to create a mixer. So the samples get put in a mixer like this, initially bottles, and then run the others. But for instance, with a mixer like this, what we needed to work out is, does it make a difference which part of which tube the samples go into for mixing? Does that affect the results, change the results in any way? Does it make a difference whether it's going to move in one direction and at what speed, or whether it's going back the other way? So they're all things that we had to work through. That was all done under the grant that we received from the West Australian Research Council through MRIWA. Other things that we had to do were we had to set up our lab. We had to set up research facilities, and the grant that we received allowed us to do that. It gave us a chance to not rush out a commercial product, but to just knock out the known unknowns. We had to work through the many different styles of gold mineralization, work through the different standards that there are. So there was a heck of a lot of just fundamental research, and the grant enabled us to do that. It also helped to bring together different companies to work in a very cooperative way to solve a common problem that the industry needed solving. And by having the research grant behind us, of course, it made it much easier then to apply for an R&D rebate, because clearly we were doing fundamental research, which again also then extended the runway that we had as a tech company ahead of commercial release. Ultimately as well, then, because we were able to demonstrate collaborative research coupled with getting a prestigious MRIWA grant, that then helped us to attract investors, which then furthered our runway to development. So the stage we've got to now is that we launched the product 18 months ago. We've launched our technique. I'll just say that our technique has led to a discovery in Western Australia already. In the 18 months since we've launched, we've managed to export to 21 countries. We've had interest from 45 countries, and late last year we won, awarded overall winner of Innovator of the Year, Western Australia, which was a great, not only a shock to us and a great surprise and pleasure, but it's also helped to raise our profile quite a bit. But I can just say that, look, working with MRIWA, it did allow us to get that fundamental research done, which we couldn't have done in the same way had we just survived on the limited amount of seed capital we had, and also trying to get all that from investors who would have been impatient to get something out. And we ran the risk then of taking something that was half-baked rather than properly researched, and gave us a very solid foundation on which to build. So that's why I'm happy to talk at this and support the work which MRIWA does and the funding that can come from the West Australian government for it. I'm very happy to acknowledge all that. So yeah, that's our story in a nutshell. Encourage people to get on board and to go through the process. At the time, there's a bit of paperwork to go through, etc. With DocuSign and things like that being much more common, I think it will speed things up a bit. But other than that, though, it's a relatively painless process, and the reporting on whatever means that we've ended up with a good report that documents all that, and from that then it gives others a bit of credibility in terms of the technology. So if you're developing something that ultimately you want to put out to industry, always best to do some good science behind it. We don't do I reckon science, we do science, and test things and challenge ourselves, and that's what the grant allowed us to do. So thanks very much.
Thanks, Simon. That's been such an exciting journey and well rewarded last year as WA Innovator of the Year. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. So now if I might move on to the METS program itself, just share the window. Apologies for that technical difficulty there for the moment. Okay, so just before we kick off, if you could vote in the chat, what area of the METS sector do you work in? We can give you about 30 seconds to go through that. Please vote in the chat. Great, thank you for that. As we mentioned before, I'm Tim Walton. I'm the Research Portfolio Manager here looking after the METS program. And again, thanks, Simon, for being online. We are having half an hour of Q&A afterwards, so Simon is staying on. If you have any direct questions, please put them into the chat. Okay, so I've spoken briefly about the West Australian Minerals Research Institute. As I said, we've been around since 1981 in various forms, and we have a proven track record of supporting research and companies to develop new products and services and to basically take exploration forward also. We have a number of research priorities, and we have a very targeted approach to the way that we fund. We are governed by a board and of industry experts. Okay, so if we can talk about the focus areas for the moment. We have targeted areas around exploration. As you can see there, we've been active in a number of areas, and at the moment our priorities are net zero emissions mining, critical minerals, green steel, exploration amplification, alternative use of tailings and waste, and precision and low impact mining. So you're probably wondering how the METS program fits in there. METS program is put in place as a policy in the West Australian government to diversify the mining and METS sector. The reason behind that is that Western Australia is so reliant on its minerals and mining sector that we need to keep our competitive advantage. As you're probably aware, in 2022, we had a record-breaking sales of $254 billion from the resources sector. Now, why that's important is that's sales only. That's not the direct and indirect value of the industry. So it's absolutely massive. And I imagine most of you, and there are 22 of us on, have some experience in working in there, and that's why you're wanting to continue on with the research to create new products. It's really important, though, with the the amount of projects that are in the pipeline, that we continue to create that competitive advantage. Some of the areas of key research that industry expects from us are data-driven decisions, the social and environmental sustainability, exploration undercover, advanced extraction and processing, mining automation and robotics. All of those things are going to make us continue to have our competitive advantage in the mining sector. So the METS sector in Western Australia, you might think, is pretty mature, and it is. There are some enormous companies, global companies, that are already working. You'll see some of those listed below on this slide. But just to give you a sense of how big it is, there are 15,000 businesses in Western Australia providing goods and services to the mining industry. And about 1,800 of those, as far as we can tell, are specialised METS companies. Those METS companies are recognised as providing excellence in innovation and new products to support the mining industry. And many of you will understand that we're working in some of the harshest environments in the remotest conditions. So we have real expertise in those areas. That's been identified by those international companies as being an opportunity, and they continue to have a large presence here. What the West Australian government is planning to do is support the METS sector so we can have homegrown large METS companies, which then can develop products and services to support not only the West Australian mining industry, but to take those products to the world, creating exports, jobs and new businesses. So the METS Innovation Program is working to support smaller companies to do the research and create intellectual property and translate that through all the way from product, services and new markets. That's the important part. The translation aspects of the research projects that we'll support mean that you have a commercialisation plan, commercial partners perhaps already in place, and an idea of time frame to get to market. In addition to that, bringing those to market will provide that with the West Australian mining industry sustained competitive advantage. So the program itself is $3 million in funding for industry-led METS research projects with matched funding of up to $250,000 for eligible companies for collaborative projects. The program itself will be really looking at new technologies coming out of that research that can move quickly to market. So on the technology readiness levels, we would be hoping to be looking at projects that are around TRL 4, moving to 7, 8 or 9 as quickly as possible. And the program will also help navigate the innovation ecosystem, because MRIWA is not the only source of funding within Australia. So we will be able to help you connect with other funders if is a more appropriate source. And secondly, as we build over the next 4 years, our networks, working with partners such as Osmine, we are trying to facilitate relationships that will lead to faster commercialisation and translation of the products. So I'll talk briefly about the criteria. So there are 5 things that you'll need to address to make sure that this scheme is right for you. So is your business able to demonstrate that you have an engagement with the mining industry? Are you already talking to them about research projects on particular projects? Are you doing R&D that has the opportunity to be commercialised in your company? They are the types of things we're looking at. Or are you already selling and you're developing a new product through your own R&D program? Your main business location is in WA and you have an ABN. Your business has an annual turnover of less than 50 million per annum. Your project requires no more than $250,000 in cash from MRIWA, and that will be matched 1-to-1. That doesn't mean that you can't bring cash in from other partners or other sponsors, but the minimum threshold is that for the $250,000 cash that you are seeking from MRIWA, you have $250,000 of new cash to match that. Now, there is no minimum for how much cash, so if you've got a quick project to turn around and it's low value, please still look at the criteria because we are open to those as well. It's important that your project directly benefits WA. Now, if for colleagues who may be in the eastern states, as long as you have a direct connection to a Western Australian mining industry, a miner, a company, or working for another METS company, as long as you can demonstrate that it is going to be of benefit for Western Australia, we'd be interested in looking at your project. I will just say that around the criteria, all of these points are in the guidelines. There are specific guidelines for the METS program. Strongly recommend that those are downloaded from our website and you carefully go through them before you contact us. We have a slightly different program to other we run our program slightly differently to other grants in that we are here to assist develop the strongest applications possible through the research portfolio managers such as myself and my colleagues. Why we do that is because we are not the funding decision makers, but we help through the assessment process. And we want to make sure that the strongest projects possible are going through for funding. I will remind everyone that this is West Australian taxpayers' money, so we have specific requirements around that and the accountabilities on how the decisions are made around funding. So just based on that quick overview, do you think you'll apply for MRIWA METS grant? If you could cast your vote in the chat, please. We'll have 30 seconds. Great, thank you for everyone who has responded. Just a few seconds more. Right, okay, excellent. It's good to see that there are 75% of you are going to be applying, so that's good for us to know. Okay, now if I could just talk about the application process. I mentioned to you that we have this an assisted process where you're able to talk to us directly about your application, about the research program, and take it from there. So the application submissions for this particular round of the METS program close on the 5th of March. So if you are intending to put in an application over the next week, 2 weeks, please contact us and talk to us about your project. So far this year, I have had 15 conversations and I've got about another 5 booked in for detailed discussions around the applications. So whether they all translate into applications, not sure, but certainly it's a busy time for me and my colleagues. Now, there's one aspect of this that I just need to talk about with your application submission. You'll see on the screen it talks about the IP and commercialisation approach agreed. Within the application, because it's a METS program and not just an open call research, minerals research round, we would like to know how you are going to move your technology through research into a commercialisation approach. And as part of that, what your IP protection is going to be. Our standard approach here at MRIWA is we don't want to own the IP, but we do want to be involved in discussions around commercialisation. So for those of you who haven't seen the application, there is a section at the back of the application which there are 7 choices on how you would like to manage your IP and the IP ownership in particular. So please consider those before you call. Commercialisation approach, for those of you that will be putting in applications, a discussion around commercialisation revenue is important upfront. Second part of it is once you've actually submitted your application, so this is all happening after the 5th of March, we do an eligibility and compliance check. So we make sure that you have provided enough evidence about those 5 METS criteria, METS company criteria. I'll give you an example. So it says in there that you have 50 million, less than 50 million revenue. You're actually going to certify that that's correct. And from our point of view, your certification. If we are not convinced that that certification is totally accurate and we need to get more information, then we may ask for financial statement. So we'll go through that eligibility and compliance check. We then do an assessment of the research proposal and your eligibility, and then it goes forward to our grant assessment panel. Our grant assessment panel is made up of industry practitioners and subject matter experts. These are your peers that are looking at your application. So we understand that there may be some sensitivities around your technologies. In your application, you are able to list any companies or individuals that may need to be excluded from the process. Please feel free to do that. Please be upfront with anything that you've got a concern about. The grant assessment panel goes through looking at the research program, the research methodology, how achievable the project is, and it gives a recommendation to our board. Our board then considers the recommendation from the grant assessment panel, and our board makes the decision. So they are the funding decision makers. Even though something may be recommended or not recommended, they may fund or not fund. So they are the final decision maker. Once the board's made their decision, you'll be informed in writing by our CEO whether you've been successful or not, and any conditions that may have to be met before the grant can go forward. Once you have accepted the grant and the conditions, we then move into negotiating conditions of grant. You do have the opportunity to have a look at the template beforehand. So please, if you would like to see that, please request that and we can make that available. That just means that you know what our conditions are for the grant before you enter into negotiations. The negotiation is really about finalising the schedule, and to finalise the contract or the agreement for execution. So once it's executed, the grant commences, and the money will flow not to you directly. So you may be aware in other grants that you can ask for 20% on execution. We only pay on reimbursement. So you have to start your project to be underway, and then we pay on achievement of milestones. Okay, well, with that, that's the end of the presentation. And I will just look to my colleague to see what the questions are looking like at the moment. We have one more poll for the end about whether the webinar has been useful. So go to the questions. So the first question is, what qualifies for research as in a METS project? So that's a really good question. We do research generally from blue sky conceptual right through to bringing things to market. So if you believe that you have a product that is almost ready for commercialisation, that still may be available for a research grant. We know that bringing a product to market still requires field testing, research, validation, verification, and we are what you're able to do then is to bring your project to market quicker. So we would certainly look at projects in that later TRL's sense as well. Okay. So the second question is, what does benefit to WA mean in practice? That is very broad. So it's worth, if you are a West Australian METS company and you are developing developing research that is going to be used overseas, that is relevant to Western Australia. And the reason why that is because this program is about developing a METS and supporting an innovative METS sector. That sector means that you're creating jobs and export income in Western Australia, and that is one of the requirements of the West Australian government's policy. I have a question here around testing a prototype for market readiness. So that would be a pre-commercial prototype, I'm imagining. Yes, again, as long as there is a scientific methodology and research behind it, yes. Again, that is something we would be happy to look at. And there's a reason for that. Obviously, the Australian government wants to build this METS sector, so we need new products in market. And yes, the slides will be available, and we have been recording this, so an edited version will be available on our website if you need that as well. We will make sure that we put the link to the application website in our chat. There was one last question that I did see. Okay, so I've touched on this. So how do you demonstrate that you've got turnover of less than 50 million? In most cases, the METS companies that I've spoken to so far are going to have no issue with that. It seems like a very high bar, but we've had one METS company that's had a very good year and they've had to step out of that. So how you demonstrate that is, number one, sign the certification. Secondly, be prepared to provide a letter from your CFO or from your board saying that revenue over the last 2 years is this. Yes, so we've got a question about the matched funding. MRIWA is agnostic about where the cash comes from. We've had a really good experience recently where a West Australian company had an order for a potential robot, but the company wanted some research and development done on it. So they provided a purchase order to the value of the project, and we didn't match that funding in that case, but we provided financial assistance. So if you have a purchase order for a new piece of research, yeah, certainly that would be a way to fund it. Also, if you've got an industry partner who wants to invest through MRIWA and have us manage their financial contribution, and then the METS company or the lead organisation doesn't put money in at all, then yes, we'll accept that as well. Company criteria for one-to-one. So literally, if you're just taking cash out of your bank account and matching it, we're happy to do that. Literally, new cash from whatever source you are proposing will be acceptable. Please, so the one thing that we can't do is we can't lever up existing Western Australian government grants. So if you have a grant from another WA agency and then you want to have it matched by us, that we would not accept that, because that would be double dipping in WA grants funding. Okay, any other questions? Any comments or concerns that you would like to raise? Okay. Well, with that, oh, here's Simon. You're on mute, Simon. You're still on mute, Simon.
If I could just make one last comment for those who are successful, in terms of when you're invoicing MERIWA, MRIWA, make sure you set up a project code and you're capturing your costs so they're very clear and very transparent, because when you do come to invoice, you will need to put in a reconciliation against it. It's against expenditures, and you have to demonstrate and justify those expenditures. It's okay once we knew that after the first round, and that's fine, but if I can just pass on that one bit of experience first up, and that's the only one.
Thanks, Simon. That's actually a really good point. So this grant scheme is slightly different in that we pay on reimbursements. The other thing is, and a couple of the companies that I've been speaking to this week are interested in the reporting as well, because final report is required. We do have openness and transparency around West Australian government or taxpayers' money, so we have to be accountable for those for the requirements under that. So there is a final report required. There is concerns, obviously, from METS companies around releasing IP to the market early. We are completely aware of that, and what we are open to is providing a report on your research findings, but not disclosing your IP. I think, Simon, is that your experience?
Yeah, that's definitely our experience. So you can report things out. You just have to be mindful that as you're reporting that it's going to be opened up to everyone. You can say enough, but you don't necessarily have to say everything. And that was very understanding. It does need to be a quality report. It is gone through very carefully. We had a number of edits on it, which were useful, and it ends up with a better quality at the back end. But yeah, we're very cognizant of not giving away everything, but we want to report enough back to recognise that we have done the fundamental research. So yeah, and it's based on those criteria.
Excellent. Thanks, Simon. Thanks for that clarification. Yeah, and just on the reporting also, MRIWA is not an industry development mechanism within government. It's a research mechanism. So we do have expectations about the quality of the final reports, the quality of the scientific method used, the research methodology, because all of that and the final report, remember, will be available publicly on our website forever. So if you go back to our website, you can see case studies and reports going back along over time. Okay, all right. No, final call for any comments, concerns, questions. Okay, well, thank you all very much for your time. I am available, and you have my email there, to answer any questions you may have, to have discussions. We are obviously coming towards 5 weeks to go before submission. If you are wanting feedback from MRIWA on your application, we can provide comment. We won't rewrite it. You'll need to provide that at the very latest in the last week of February. That is still going to be very tight, but please do not give it to us in March. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all for your attention. Really appreciate your attendance and your interest. I look forward to speaking to many of you. Finally, before we go, if you could just give us some feedback on whether the webinar was helpful, click your link. I'll give you 30 seconds to do that. Okay, so it's saying that the link's not working. I have just tested it and it is, but it is on my machine. Okay, well, maybe if you wouldn't mind, if you don't mind being not anonymous, just let me know if it was or if it wasn't, and then perhaps if I speak to you later, you can give me feedback as well. But again, thank you very much for your attendance and your interest. It's an exciting sector. Really appreciate everyone's attendance, and remember that a version of this will be available on our website. Thank you so much, and goodbye.